Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's BAInsights session. Today, we're talking about your business analysis approach with a focus on digital. And I'm glad to have two guests with me to talk about a very subject. And before we get into the detail of the subject, of course, I'll ask both of them to introduce themselves. And if I may, I'll start with yourself, Simon, to give you your intro, please.
Thanks, John, and thanks for inviting me on here today. I'm Simon Marriott. I'm based near Cambridge, UK. I'm a senior business analyst at AstraZeneca, although today all views are my own, I have to say that, legal disclosure. I've worked across a range of scientific industry sectors, kind of a broad specialist. So I've worked in agrochem, pharmaceuticals, environmental, and I've worked in product companies and service-oriented companies. It's a nice place I find myself to sit. I have a very broad overview of the world, but also a very real focus and specialization within my domain. I've been a BA about 15 years. I've managed a large BA team. I've set up 2 successful communities of practice. And I think when I was hired to be the manager of that BA team, I think the manager said something to me along the lines of, if they'd recruited someone else to be the manager of that team and raise the game on business analysis, you would have just gone and done it anyway, Simon. So I just made you that instead. So I'm always excited about how we can raise our game as business analysis, and I can't quite stop doing that.
Excellent. Well, hopefully this is another of the right places to be, Simon, on that front as well, and share some of the insights that you've gathered over your 15 years anyway. So thank you for the introduction. Brilliant. And Meher, over to you, if I could, as well, for your introduction.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, John. So I am myself Meher Naveen. I am from Malaysia. So I am working as a business analyst since the last 10 years. Before that, I was in operations. I was working in an operations team in insurance company. So in the last 10 years, I was working, though I'm working in different kind of insurance companies, I'm mostly into enterprise level business analysis, and previously, I would say partially into product-based company as well. So currently at this company, I'm a contract business analyst working as a lead PA, managing the projects and taking care of managing. It's not managing, but leading few business analysts along with me within the project workspace. That's all about me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. All right, good. Well, I know for sure that I've got 2 of the right people to be joining this session and talking about BA approach anyway, that's for sure. So let's maybe start with a question on that. And I'll direct it to yourself, Simon. So really, that's just to get your view of what is your business analysis approach, but with a digital focus, if you would mind.
Yeah, I think it's a big question. And before I'll start on it, I'll just say, if you've not seen the webcast with Angela Wick and you're not buying her book, then do listen to this conversation. It's going to be good, but also look at that, because I think she's on the right track. And I think what she's saying, and it's the first time I've heard someone saying what I've been thinking, is that ultimately nothing changes, but in the execution, a lot of things change. So to do business analysis, we still are going to do things like stakeholder analysis. We're still going to research and elicit information. We're still going to synthesize that information into something and facilitate decisions. None of that is going to change, but our ability to do that is going to change. And as we think about creating that ability to do that using digital in wherever we work, whether we're a consulting agency, a product team, or a large organization, corporate, you start to find yourself thinking a lot more about backstage processes to sort of enable front stage business analysis. It creates a very different way of thinking about business analysis, I think. But I think teams who already have, or organizations that have already got that backstage group, a small COP or a small COE or something like that. I think they'll have a head start on moving in this space as long as they want to go in the right direction with it.
When we say backstage, Simon, is that referring more to like the community of practice that supports the BAs on the ground, or are we talking perhaps thinking more about the back end of the system?
It's both. I think traditionally community of practices are focused on training, knowledge sharing, standardizing templates or practices or that kind of thing. What we want to think about now, and it's something that I've been working on, is looking at the different things that we do all the time, every time we do analysis, and thinking what tooling or systems or data or process that we can put in there that accelerates that and aggregates that. And so in that respect, it's no different to when we as business analysts work with our customers or our stakeholders to transform their business processes. There's always some ops team that then enables that backstage. It might be a formalized ops team, or it might be a sort of very matrixed one. But there's always something that enables that. If you want to do the same for a business analysis team, you need to think about that ops capability, which could be a team or it could be matrixed, but there's something that enables it. Individuals on their own can't make it happen.
I see. And I mean, a really important point here that applies not just to digital, but generally as a business analyst anyway, is that you're not just going it alone. Even if you're a lone BA or you think you are on a project, there's typically wider BAs in the organization. Hopefully there's a community of practice. Maybe if you're a consultant, you might work in the organization with other BAs, and therefore you're probably not the first person doing this type of analysis in that situation. So it's always there to, I guess, leverage what's been done before and leverage more experienced colleagues if they're available. So I think a great start. Thank you, Simon. And Meher, can we ask you the same question then, please, in terms of your approach to digital BA or digital business analysis?
So if you ask me, right, I would fall back onto the business analysis core concept model. Okay, so we have something in IIBA where we call it business analysis core concept model, where it starts with, it's basically does not start, it depends on one another, like the needs. What is it need? We need to look at the business context also. Why this project is being started? What is the need of the stakeholder? What is the need of who are the basically stakeholders? Then what is the organizational context on why this business project is being started with? Okay, and then you come up with the needs and the solutions and what is the value this particular project has to be delivered. All these things we need to look at. And one main aspect which we should not forget is basically business digital transformation is not only a technology-based thing, but also related to the cultural shift or the mindset shift of the whole organization or the team for which this particular solution is being catered to. So that part also has to be looked as part of the business analysis, where the stakeholders are, what is their background, basically what are their KPIs and how they have to be taken care of. So that's what when we talk about these things, we need to look at the close collaborations, communications, just like what he was telling earlier.
Yeah, and that certainly resonates with me, Meher, because I guess in terms of business analysis approach, as Simon pointed out before, many of the things, the building blocks that we have in place for any type of business analysis project where we're thinking about the scope and the stakeholders, and we think about sometimes the process, all those things still apply. But I guess when it's a digital focus, it's important to start thinking about not just your project stakeholders, but who are going to be the users of that digital product that you're delivering. So I think for me, when I think about that, naturally I'm starting to think about, well, how am I going to approach the analysis for that particular aspect on top of all the other analysis I'm doing? So how can I think about as an example, the user experience, how I can bring to prominence
Yes.
like the UI involved or user interface involved for that tool or device that we're going to be using.
Yeah. So that's where basically when we talk, first of all, in my experience, or I would always look at these projects as not a separate entity from the regular projects, but it is always human centric. End of the day, the stakeholder has to be benefited. So how are they benefited? So when we talk about the stakeholders, we have to look at the systems and what they are using. Current systems, how are they integrated? Are they integrated or not? Basically, what is the inputs or the data being fed, and what are the outcomes out of this? So if we can establish these things, then we can look at how we can enhance them from the point of digitalization or transforming the whole thing by integrating the whole different systems, gathering the data at one place if required, or to use different aspects of the data, bring them together and deliver what is actually required.
And I'm sure we'll talk about a few other techniques and approaches as well as we go through the session, but you obviously touched on data there, and it'd be interesting to get your view and then subsequently Simon's view as well on actually approaches for how to approach the data analysis, the data definition for a digital project, and whether that is perhaps any different than you might do normally. But I'll leave that up to you to share.
Simon, would you want to go first?
Oh, thank you. I think it's 2024, and so when I said earlier about nothing really changes, we're still doing business analysis. But what is changing is we can get our hands on a lot more data, and we should be thinking about aggregating data or sort of building our organizational analysis assets, essentially. And you can use that data to understand whatever question you're trying to understand quicker. And data tells a certain story that we need to be fluent in, and we need to understand the biases in the data that can be different to what a person might say. So, we get in that mindset of triangulating. What is the data saying? What are the users or the people or the stakeholders saying? And so I've certainly, over the last few years, focused on trying to either turn more of what we do as business analysts into data, so it's kind of reusable, or look for data sources that business analysts can use to answer or provide the information needed to do sort of certain routine tasks on the core capability model as described earlier. I think inevitably when you do that, you're often surfacing that through some kind of tool, right? And obviously, large language model chat sort of tools is one tool that's quite popular at the minute. When you're using those, you need to be very savvy about what is the data source and how are you getting it to focus. But there are a lot of other tools we've got that are, come before large language models came along, right? Which are data orientated tools that we've got at our fingertips, or if we've not got it at our fingertips, we're sort of got some awareness of. And I always think like BPMN is a really classic example of that. It's a process modeling standard that a lot of the bits of software that you run you can put your process model in, there's a data set underneath that with a BPMN. And so we've been turning our business analysis activities into data for quite a long time, actually. It's just we hadn't really thought about it like that, and digital creates a new opportunity to think about it like that.
Yeah, and that's sort of by thinking of it in that way, it's a lot easier to compare what different stakeholders are actually providing, isn't it? I mean, like as an example, I might speak about generically the same process with different stakeholders, maybe from different parts of the organisation, or even like the same parts of the organisation but in different locations. And actually, sometimes they may tell me the process the way it happens today, and that may sometimes appear exactly the same as in another location I heard about. other times it might appear quite different, and sometimes actually the way to figure out what is the right information I'm hearing is to look into the data and really understand, are they all perhaps using a similar workflow, or are they capturing information about their process at similar milestones, and therefore can we therefore think of it in a similarly consistent way? And it's not always the case, but at least by bringing those different perspectives together, looking at the data, it helps give another perspective rather than just relying on speaking to people. And I know that's just one small part.
And exactly that example, that was my first use case of showing, here's something we've always done, doing process modeling. Now we've turned that into data and used it to give a quantitative answer about the state of the processes, which we used it to talk about the complexity. And we create some scores from the BPMN data to talk about the complexity and variation in that data set. Whereas before we'd say something like, oh, we interviewed a lot of people and there are a lot of differences in the way you work. And there are some similarities. And we might express it broadly, but not quantifiably. And so that was my first use case, that one of how we switched turning something from a broad statement to a quantifiable statement. And I think we can do that with almost anything we do. It's just, so that's sort of my ambition, but it's some things are harder than others.
That's it. But at least having the ambition in the first place means you're probably asking the right sort of questions as a BA to see, is this information already held somewhere where I can access it? What does it look like? Who do I speak to get a bit more insight into it? It definitely feels like the right things to be talking about. I mean, I know we've talked about process in that example. I mean, I think that what I would add is really, I often start talking about, well, actually, has there been information provided by users of the system or those involved in the process previously about existing pain points? Are there perhaps a backlog of requirements that never made it onto into the final release of a prior project? This is all useful data and useful insights that might still apply. Lessons learned might be another, that you can take as almost like your inputs to the next engagement or the next set of conversations and understand, do they still apply? I think even more thing about data, as we quite often do, is thinking about the business case for each of the requirements or each of the pain points or issues that we're hearing. Really, it's always important to get to the data in those examples, because you're trying to prove the relative merits of one thing versus another. And relying on people's emotions is not normally the right way of doing it. So therefore, we've got something a little bit more measurable that is, that we can use to define priorities is certainly more helpful in my view. I wonder, Meher, on your perspective on like how you might approach a data analysis, data definition, or talk about similar things in that topic area.
Yeah, while we look at the user perspective, not only from the user perspective, sometimes from the projects which I do on the RPA, robotic process automation, the data which is provided by the bots also gives us some insights. Like every day there are certain number of bots which will be running. So these bots, every day it's not mandatory that a bot will take a specific period of time. Say, for example, a bot can complete a task within 1 minute. The same bot the next day might take 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes. So these insights of the data, meaning when we are trying to capture this data, right, it's not only from the user perspective, we also should capture the data of the bots or any other transactions which are happening from the automated processes also. So something like event files or the log files when we create, and when we start analyzing them, that will eventually give us some insights on how to improve the overall process, which will eventually tie back to the user processes and make them more efficient. So, even when we look at the UiPath orchestrator and other things, these things might not give much exposure to the data analysis part. So normally what we do is we download those log files, convert them into readable data, move it into Power BI to analyze things and how things are moving. So this is how this is basically my experience with working with the data, other than the regular data analysis which we do as part of our insurance-based business analysis, where we get into the data of pricing models and all these things. That is a very vast thing where pricing teams and actuarial teams gets involved over there. So, but from my side, that is the experience of bot analysis. Yeah.
You mentioned there, obviously, Power BI is one such tool or technology that people can use as part of their analysis. I know that's quite focused on data and visualization. We can obviously stick with data and visualization, or go more broadly, whichever you wish when we talk about BA overall. But are there any other tools or technologies that you might typically use as part of your analysis in a digital?
Mostly Excel will help from my task, right? I would say for me, at least, the Excel will help at the maximum level. We don't go beyond Excel as of now.
Okay. And I mean, an Excel is quite a good use of a tool that is sufficiently flexible. We can do a number of things that a lot of BAs, irrespective of the environment they're in, can do. Because, I mean, as we often talk about digital, we're thinking about the end product, what's being presented to the users. We can use Excel to mock up some example dashboards, or to even put some squares on a page to make it represent what the application might look like.
Yeah, from the dashboards and mockups, I prefer generally using draw.io. So that is an overall tool where we can use for the flows, mockups, and all these things, whatnot. But along with that, on the high level analysis, right, we do also use SQL developer, which we call it. So that is more on analyzing based on the SQL queries which we write to extract and analyze the data on that. But for me, I mostly use, though I use the SQL developer tool to extract the data, I would prefer doing the analysis on the Excel pattern.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And I think, I mean, I'm sure if we had this conversation with 100 different people, they probably all come up with slightly different tools that they prefer to use. And obviously, you're talking a different context all the time. I mean, but SQL developer is another example where, the need to recognize the data that underpins the analysis, obtaining that data is an important activity, and therefore that's why the merits of a SQL developer in that perspective comes to the fore. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And Simon, if I could ask a similar question to you around tooling and technique that you might prefer to use or suggest using.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, more broadly, I'm always thinking, what can we use to aggregate the data that we are hearing or seeing or learning? Or what can we use to get data on a particular information set that we need? And what I ended up doing, and I did it in partnership with our user experience ops lead. I created a sort of generic kind of capability model of analysis, research, things that we do in common. So we've got stakeholder analysis, research this information, synthesize that information, and facilitate decisions. And then below them, we've got things like, research stakeholders or identify target demographics as sort of sub capabilities. And then we just almost did a gap analysis. Where have we already got something that works really well that we just need to tell people about? And then where have we got gaps? Look at something like synthesizing information. We recognize that epics and user stories is a way of synthesizing our analysis into information. We've got everyone across the company has access to Confluence and Jira for doing that. So that's a data source that we recognize exists. It holds a ton of information, and we sort of realize there's a lot we could do there, but it's going to take time to work on that. We've got a standard process modeling tool now. We've got the user ops lead has got some standard tooling, and she's got a data bank of personas that have been generated. So we've got all these kind of things going across. We've got some AIs we've got access to, generative AIs we've got access to, like Copilot, ChatGPT. So if we want to do domain research, we've got tools for that. We've got vendor-based product for collaborative whiteboard type working. So we've got one for virtual workshops. And then if you look at stakeholder analysis, and my workers tend to be focused on the internal workers, because I work in R&D, so we're a production line essentially. I've got tools I use for researching my stakeholders. What are they interested in? Who do they work with? What's their passions? How long have they been in the company? Are they embedded in the way the company works, or are they just arrived and really open to new ideas, or might bring in new alternatives from elsewhere? So you can learn a lot about that just with Microsoft Office or your corporate, HR database. And there's a lot of information redacted in those, but there's places you can go to find out things. LinkedIn, I never go and speak to a stakeholder without looking at their LinkedIn profile. Because I work with a lot of scientists, I check out their citation index, or their publication index, to see, what are their research interests. Are they very, and so you can see these personas kind of boil out that can alter how you interact with them, rather than, so you might have your interview script that you've planned, but I will tweak that based off the research I've done on those people, using those different data sets. And I can do it so fast now. I have a 5-minute reminder comes up before I speak to someone, and I've got those things open. I just look at them and go, okay, they're into that. What does that mean? I don't really understand that word. Put it into ChatGPT. What does this mean? Oh, yeah. I see. And so I'm speaking to a new stakeholder. I've learned a lot about them. I know if they're going to care about my project or not care, or I can put bits into the conversation that might help them engage with it. There's I could talk about tooling and capabilities on these forever.
It's nice to get different perspective in terms of what different people perceive as an appropriate tool or technique to talk about. It's interesting to hear you talk about LinkedIn as well, because certainly something I leverage now as a tool to be thought in a similar way, really, Simon. Before I meet people, is there some information I can get from LinkedIn as to who they are, who else they might know, where they might have worked? Which can all help the initial introductions, that's for sure. And I think there was a point I recall, I couldn't tell you how long ago it was, but I remember it being at some point in the past where it was sort of met with a mental conundrum. Is it appropriate to use LinkedIn and almost be seen to be looking up people before you meet? But actually, I feel like now it's quite an acceptable process. I think people appreciate that you've taken a bit of time to understand a bit about them before you start engaging. So I think it's a great example.
I had an interview where I'd accidentally left all my research about that person open. But what I had open was their list of publications. And I shared my screen. I went, oh, sorry, I'm an analyst. I do my analysis before I speak to people. And she went, well, that's all right. That's fine. And I said, I'll just close this. And she said, no, don't. They're really good. But did you like them? Have you read any of those? And then she wanted to talk about her publications. And so actually, the interview script was thrown out the window. Yeah. She appreciated that I was interested in her and what she'd done. And I learned a lot of things that I hadn't thought to ask by listening to that. So yeah.
So Simon, just to check, were you saying that you are using some tool to do the stakeholder analysis? How are you coming up with the models?
I've got 5 different data sources I go to. So the Microsoft Graph.
Sorry,
the Microsoft Graph. So which is what the Office 365 is based on, a graph model. And there's a graph API for it, which you can access through different UI applications. But if you're not aware of what the Microsoft Graph tells you about, go on YouTube. Anyone on here who's a business analyst that is in a Microsoft shop where Microsoft Office 365 is using their company, you don't know what the Microsoft Graph is, go onto YouTube and look it up. and learn about it. You don't need to know the API details or functions. There's ways to get access to that information just through most Office products. But it's probably our best tool for researching internal stakeholders. And then we've got 2 internal databases that give us a view on employees, org models, they both give us a slightly different view, so we can get kind of demographic data on that. It's all very redacted to sort of protect certain information, but it's enough to say, oh, in this group of stakeholders, N amount of them is in this country and N amount of them is in that country, and that kind of thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Normally, the enterprise level companies do have that HR databases.
Yeah.
Can identify the people designations, their locations, and other things. But what caught my attention is the stakeholder analysis itself using a tool. Sometimes even for me also, whenever I'm doing the project, any project, in fact, when we talk about the stakeholders, we need to analyze them before we go and talk with them, right? So what are their interests? Their interests could be really great, but then can they influence the outcome? Okay, what are the designations? All these things matters. But if there is a tool where these things can be brought up, and it can give us a quick insights on how to handle these people, that would be really helpful for us.
Well, our Microsoft suite is based off a graph database.
Okay.
LinkedIn has a graph database underpinning it. So in theory, you could get a ton of information. You could just put in a list of stakeholders. You could look it up in those 2 graphs and give you a little table of everything you wanted, or a little narrative or a PowerPoint these days with generative AI about everything you wanted. Now, I don't know anyone who's ever done that or anyone who's even attempted to do that. But every time I talk to developers interested in business analysis, I talk to them about that. It's my little fantasy.
Good to know.
I think we can all resonate with, as we're pulling together our list of stakeholders and we go through a process, what are the key attributes that we tend to care about, so whether we're putting them in our matrix or AC or otherwise, and certainly, there is information, even if it's as simple as their location, that you can pull from an existing internal application rather than have to rekey it is definitely useful. And I think as well, the challenge is not just how you capture the data in the first place, but it's how you keep it relevant and updated. Because quite often a really important perspective to take as BA is not just who your initial stakeholders were, but how things have changed. Like, has someone moved their job? Have they moved the location? And if so, that's going to trigger potentially some activities on my part. So being aware of it is definitely useful. I think as well, I think that things that I might add I would take a slightly different dimension on the data side. I think in terms of some other tools that I tend to use, or if I can sometimes use, I think Mural is quite a useful tool to be able to, share ideas across a large set of stakeholders who potentially we're going to ask to contribute their views and designs and perspectives. Particularly if we're talking about potentially like an application or a screen, for example, getting them to start to think about their ideas, to share them, to talk about them, ultimately to refine them, move them around. That can certainly help. I think when it comes to just drawing, I think simple tools like Visio are more than helpful as well. And I think that probably the main thing for me is really not necessarily the particular tool that you use. I guess being aware beforehand of what purpose you would want to engage with the tool, and then you can typically find an equivalent that will work. Maybe not always the best tool, but I'm sure something that will work in at least to a level anyway.
Yeah. Constant collaboration and communication always helps.
Yeah. And I think, even as you were talking there as well before, just getting access to what the individual's done before, potentially if you've got access to Jira and Confluence, you can see where individuals have contributed to prior stories or contributed to like Confluence pages. So that can give you another perspective on their area of expertise as well. So I'm sure in the hour that we have allocated, we could probably spend 3 times that talking about tools. That's for sure.
Yeah.
at least a few good examples, and I'm glad to know as well, let's say a few different examples than I might normally have heard discussed as well. So I'm certainly pleased about that. Perhaps if we switch from tools now to think about more techniques and methods. So we're thinking about digital analysis, irrespective of the tool you tend to use. Are there any particular techniques that you might employ? So as an example, if I'm defining process, I would use a process flow, would be a technique in my view. But are there any particular techniques you might typically utilize? And I'll start with you first. So when you're doing your analysis.
Okay. When we talk about process analysis, I go with the basics of BPMN. I use BPMN rotations basically to come up with the as is. It's basic. I don't go with any fancy stuff, but I come up with the as is flow, and then come up with the what are the needs, and see whether the flow we come up with a new flow and compare the to be flow, and take a confirmation from the users. This is a basic process analysis model I work along with the sorry along with the what are the major qualitative and quantitative confirmations or acceptance criteria has to be provided by the to be model. So those things, once we establish these things, I think we are good to go ahead on this one. So while along with this, I think one of the best way, the simple and best thing is the 5 Ys and 1 H. Okay, that basic concept, you know. So every time we go, we ask, okay, why do you want this? Okay, and how do we do it at a later stage? We will think about it. I think these basics, if we stick to these basics, I think we can answer most of the issues or requirements.
Okay, no, that makes sense. And it's interesting to, I mean, it's I wish I had a pound for every time I've been on the call and heard root cause analysis, but it's good that it gets 5 Ys wrong.
Yeah, everything ties back to that. Yeah,
it's an appropriate technique though, for sure. And Simon, any particular techniques that you might?
Yeah, techniques. I mean, lots of techniques. I think I was just listening to the Angela Wick broadcast at IIBA, Angela Wick one, talking about how she thinks AI is going to subtly change business analysis. And she made a point that experimentation, I think, is going to become more of a thing in a data-driven world. So I won't dwell on that, but certainly hypothesis statements is something we're starting to use a lot, because it forces you to think about metrics, and then it forces you, and then you realize you haven't got that data, and they're relevant, and so you start getting into the debate about sort of leading and lagging metrics and indicators that kind of come before that, and then that almost forms your business case. So that's one thing. I think the other thing, though, is sort of back to the BABOK areas. The business analysis planning and management area. I've always been quite passionate about that. I think it's a real enabler that can switch people who aren't strong in there, but otherwise are really good. It's the difference between good and great is getting that bit right. And when you're doing digital business analysis, you need to start thinking about some of the components in there, not just at your initial initiative level, but at a team or department or organizational level. So information management is one of the components of, of the business analysis planning and management. And so if you now start thinking about doing business analysis in a more digital way, where you're aggregating some of your insights or some of your data, then that information management discipline suddenly changes how you're doing business analysis. Because before, everything's done on an initiative level or an individual level. And there'll be attempts and broad statements to make it a bit broader, but in reality, people are focused on getting the job done. That's what they're paid for. That's what they're rewarded for. That's what their managers want them to do, and their project managers want them to do, or scrum masters or product owners, whatever your model. But in a digital world, it becomes less about that individual analysis and the individual BAs on it, and it becomes more of a group collective effort to understand your customer better, or to understand your organization better, and to build data sets that you can use to act and drive change quicker and in a more agile way. And that's, to me, is the most important aspect of moving to digital business analysis, because that's where you get the intersection of digital with organizational change and behavioral change for individuals. And that is the hardest part to get right for any digital transformation. Doesn't matter if it's looking at us, right, or any area. And so, but again, the BABOK helps us out here. You know, some of that thinking that goes into that business analysis planning and management section, and the collaboration section and the solution evaluation section. There's a lot in there that will tell you what you should have thought of before you went and did it the way you did it. I think that's always my favorite technique area.
It just shows the importance as well of taking some time up front to think about how you're going to approach it, what the situation is, but looking as well at what's been done previously or what exists previously. And it's interesting. I mean, I jotted down a few of my own answers, I suppose, to this question before we started, and they're all very much on that sort of line. So really thinking about, you know, what is there available already within the global BA community team that they can share, you know, what's available within the enterprise process, you know, what's available in terms of training or other materials to share as well. And specifically, if I think about some of those points, you know, maybe there's a persona library been pulled together already to make us think about some of the users that are actually going to be utilizing our digital products. Maybe there's a step beyond that. You know, maybe there's already user journeys that have been mapped as well that we can think about. You know, so I think there's certainly some very apt techniques that we can consider, and some of them are hopefully already in place to some degree that we can go and leverage. But then beyond that, you know, once we've got that context of why tools are going to be used or who's going to be using them, then actually we can perhaps think about techniques that are more specific, as we probably mentioned already, around things like prototyping and doing wireframes and so such.
Right.
But yeah, no, and I definitely like that point as well about thinking beyond just the project and the team that you're in, because if you do that, you know, not only are we making ourselves more open to the information that possibly already exists in the organization, but maybe if there isn't things that already exist, then it's a good opportunity for the BA to say, well, actually, I've got some things that I've produced on this project. Maybe I can share them with my community. So they're
document analysis.
Yeah.
That's right, mate. You made a point now. Sorry, I didn't quite catch it.
No, I'm saying document analysis. What you're saying is basically the document analysis of the existing artifacts of a project. So go through them. Yeah, that's what I'm just adding on to what you're saying. Yeah.
Gotcha. And I mean, I suppose another question to think about along those sort of lines really is to how approaches or strategies that you might employ today to basically standardize or to centralize your use of data or digital assets as you go through your analysis. And I wonder, Meher, can I start with that, with you on that question?
So normally we do use the SharePoint. We normally use Office 365 a lot in our office. So in order to, you know, centralize the document, SharePoint is one of the easiest and best available tool around. So from there, we have the portals created with the hyperlinks to the whatever documents we require. So normally we do maintain the latest documentation over there. If there are anything old versions, we do archive them in a separate folders. But the access is generally provided to the latest documentation, latest version of the documentation. This is in terms of the documentation. But if you look from the collaboration point of view, there are a lot of things. Basically, the teams itself works like that, right? So whenever, just like Simon was stating earlier, like whenever we require to centralize something in terms of having a whiteboard or something, we can use the whiteboard, Microsoft whiteboard itself for that particular project. You can create a channel in Teams where you can add the Power BI dashboard, where you can add a whiteboard to which everybody can come and input their collaborations. And you can have folders where you can drop down all the documentation so that everything. So it's best. Whatever you can think of, you can do it, and centralized everything within Microsoft Teams itself.
And I suppose by doing it, Matt, you're also thinking about how you can standardize approaches as well, so that you can categorize them in a way that the different people in the BA community can access those artifacts that you've been producing. Part of that one for sure. Simon, you have a perspective on it?
Yeah, I mean, I want to build on those two, because I think, Naveen said, I think it was, whatever you want to do, you can do it. And that's where we are with digital, right? If you put some effort into it, you can work out how to do it. But the trick is how do you standardize that across an organization, like you said, John, and centralize it? And then in digital, when you're trying to centralize things, you're immediately throwing up a lot of risks. You're throwing up security risks, you're throwing up privacy risks. So you have to do a lot of thinking around how to address those. And you end up in a compromised state where you're redacting information, and therefore you can still aggregate it. But once it's aggregated, you've lost some information. Whereas if everyone just kept it in their own little project folders, with their own little security guards around it, it would have more information with it in there, but nothing would be able to get at it. So there's these kind of compromises, and that's where I was talking about it being much more of a team or organizational play now, because you've got to get people aligned with those compromises to make that work. And so as I go down this rabbit hole over the last few years, I find, it doesn't really matter what debt set we're looking at, that is the conversation that we're having along. Is that anonymization, privacy, sort of redacting what to redact, standardization, trying to balance agency of the individual analyst with collective benefit, which of course gets us back to cultural change, and particularly, different nationalities have very different views on individual agency versus collective benefit. So you're straight in there again. So it's it's like I said at the start, it's not a new problem. It's
certainly important, though, as you call out, that there is always that correlation between things that you can standardize and centralize and those things that really are best employed at a detailed level on particular projects or initiatives. But I think if continually those on projects are looking at how they can join up with the organisation, if the organisations think about how they can join to the individual projects, whether it's on privacy or otherwise, then hopefully they're at least connecting in some way to influence really the right level of centralisation and standardisation. At least.
But in my experience, right, what the Microsoft Teams really helps us a lot on this one. You have the security, whatever security level we can still control that at our level, and you can provide access to within the organization as well as the outside organization, and everything still can be kept in one particular or multiple share folders, which is again connected to your SharePoint. You can create Power Automate, or within SharePoint, you have certain kind of automation where whatever files placed in this particular folder, again, clone it into a separate folder, so that even if this folder is impacted in something, say for example, it generally does not happen, but as an example, I'm saying certain stakeholder just deletes a file, so you still have a copy over there. So Yeah, these kind of centralized things are there. And from my company, the PMO team comes up with a standardized folder structure every time. So whenever we create a project, we just clone the SharePoint folder of the list of folders like requirements, initiation, basically the initiation of the RFPs going out, okay, coming in, what are the tender things, process, all these things. For everything, we have the whole life cycle SDLC of the whole thing in each folder. So we just clone it to ensure that the standardization is maintained.
And that, I mean, that's probably a good place to probably end that question, and I suppose end the session really in recognizing that, you know, the act of digital analysis, digital standardization, they're not something that just happens only within the BA team. There's connections not just with the organization we talked about,
yes,
but different roles as well, like the PMOs. So
yeah,
but I guess we can we could talk about that for a while. We won't, I know that, because I don't want to keep you forever. But I think there's a place to stop. So it's definitely Meher, Simon, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. I'm sure we'll look forward to hearing from you in the future. But thank you again.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
John. Thanks, Simon.